It's really my great honor to be chairing a session with three amazing women, and on a subject which is so very close to my heart. I would like to start by introducing our panelists. First is Nayanika Mookherjee, and this session actually marks the launch of her South Asian edition of the Spectral Wound. That's the other edition, sorry. That's the old edition. Okay, so this is the South Asian, come up from Zuban. So she's a research director and reader in anthropology at Durham University. And in June 2014, she was invited to the International Summit to End Sexual Violence in Conflict. And she was also awarded the Mahatma Gandhi Brothers Vishaman Award at the House of Lords for her social anthropological work on gendered violence during wars. She has published extensively on anthropology of violence, ethics, and aesthetics. Her book, The Spectral Wound, Sexual Violence, Public Memories in the Bangladesh War, was shortlisted for the BBC's Thinking Aloud and Best Ethnographic Award. Firdous Azim is Professor of English at Brack University and a women's rights activist. And she combines both literature and feminist concerns in her writings. Her books include The Colonial Rise of the Novel, and she has co-edited Infinite Variety Essays on Society and Literature. She's part of the Feminist Review and Inter-Asian Cultural Studies editorial board, has edited special issues for both journals, and she's spearheading an initiative to document and also help Birangonas now in Bangladesh. Shireen Huq is an activist in the women's movement for the last 25 years, founder member of Nayanika, a resource person and trainer on gender rights and development issues in Bangladesh. And she's also worked for DANIDA, Bangladesh Human Rights and Good Governance Program, from 1987 to 2001 as an advisor, and also from 2003 to 2006 as a deputy program coordinator. So welcome everybody. I think I'll just plunge right into this subject. I mean, a lot has been said, I think, last couple of years, and there have been a lot of discussions. But I want to go back right to the beginning. I think the reason why I wanted particularly Shireen and Firdous on this panel is because you both have been here in Bangladesh and yet very much engaged in women's rights. So I would like to know, when did you first start hearing about what had happened during the war? And what was the kind of feeling and thoughts coming out then, and the kind of narrative? So maybe Shireen first.
Okay, that takes me back many years. 71, it was a time when those of us who were in Dhaka were almost always glued to the Bangladesh Shadin Bangla Betar Kendra, which was the radio that was set up during 71. And of course, as we listened to many stories of the horrific genocide that took place, but also the brave fights that our Mukti Joddhas were putting up, there was occasionally also reports about how women had been tortured by the Pakistan army and also Bangladeshi collaborators of the Pakistan army. But I was 17 at that time, and I think I was more taken up, to be very honest, more taken up with the struggle for freedom at that time. And I think, and this is a question I've asked myself many times, is why did we not engage more on the issue of what happened to the women? And why did they become the forgotten women of 71? And there has been a general silence since about it. And I think in the last 2-3 years that silence has been broken by very many different groups who tried to bring Birangona women to the forefront, before the public eye, but also generally discussing, and I'm sure like Nayanika's book is another important addition to giving voice to what happened to women and to the women, to the lives they had to lead afterwards. I think my first encounter was, I was, for my field research, in famous field research, I stayed in a village and there was a Women's Rehabilitation Foundation project. You had to walk into the village, And on the right, as you walk in, there was a project which nobody in the village talked about. It was a building which nobody talked about. So it was really marked in that sense by science. And I could see as I went in and out of that lane, that path, that there were women.
Huh? Which year was that?
This was 77. 77. So as I would walk in and out, I would notice there were women, and most of them wore the same sari, yellow sari with a red. So it was obviously a sari that was provided, you know. Finally, I decided to go in one day and go in and meet these women and talk to them. And I did. And I remember sort of being struck by, you know, why they were there. This was part of the big rehabilitation project by the government. And they were given training in poultry and poultry rearing and goat rearing, etc., with the idea that someday they're going to go back to their villages and have an income earning skill. I don't know really what happened to them afterwards. I never followed up. But it was only in the 90s, through Naripokko, that we began to talk about.
But I just want to go back to that time when, you know, very, very soon after the war ended, they were declared Birangonas.
Yes, within a week, 22nd
so
December.
what was the feeling then? What was your reaction then?
I think I felt proud at that time. I felt very proud that there was a declaration from the highest level. It was actually the Minister of it was he declared this, and I felt very proud that Bangladesh was going to own the women who had been, according to other, you know, narratives, been what is the word? Spoiled, violated and spoiled. So I felt proud that Bangladesh was going to own these women. But you know, that didn't last very long, because that declaration was not followed up by any concrete initiatives to restore, in quote-unquote, honor. And people were very soon talking about the women who lost their izzat, the women who lost their shambro, you know, women who lost their honor and chastity. And that is the narrative that took over the public speak. And that public speak included not only politicians, but intellectuals and cultural workers. And, you know, it became almost parroting.
Firdous, maybe you can give some of your recollections of that time.
I was about the same age as Shireen, though I turned 18 when 70. So there was a general feeling, even amongst the trust communities, that women had to be kept safe. And many people moved because of the fear of violation by the Pakistan army. So there was this feeling of danger to women's bodies, even in the popular imagination, even as the war was going on. Now further, I think there's something, the volume needs to be moderated. Okay, so you know, there was, despite everything, this added fear that was centered around women. But after 71, we moved to Dhaka. We were in Chittagong in 71, and we moved to Dhaka, and we moved to Dhanmandi Road number 4. And one of the rehabilitation centers was actually situated in road number 3, contiguous to our house, just 2 doors away. And even as an 18-year-old woman, a university student, it took me some time to realize what was happening in that house. And it was my mother who pointed out that if you wake up at the night, you can hear women wailing. And that was perhaps my first physical, which is an auditory introduction to the figure of the Birangona. So the first thing was that violated women, tragic women, and also women who had been rejected by their families because there was, and we knew Mrs. Mahmood, who was part of this rehabilitation project, and she used to visit our house, and one of the things she used to talk about was the difficulty of rehabilitating these women with their families. Maybe there were other narratives, but they were not being told to us. What we kept on hearing was family rejection. And that's the story I took with me, you know, when we started in Nayanika Mookherjee in the 90s, that they were women who had been rejected, because that is the narrative that has come through. But also about the women being forgotten. There was a lot of covering up, etc. But I think the women who have really been forgotten are the other women who were raped before and during and after 71, the so-called Bihari women. That is a rape we have not even opened the discourse towards. And I think, given our family situation, which is part Bihari, we used to hear rumors of Chittagong, of Sayyidpur, and I really think more research and more sisterhood has to be accorded to them. So it's with these feelings that, and I don't know, we started Nayanika Mookherjee in '83, and it took us nearly more than 10 years, because we started talking about Birangonas only in '97, I think.
So, you know, after sort of, you're saying that you came across this in the 70s, mid-70s. So was there a sort of silence until we started talking about it again in the 90s? I mean, did it just drop off the map, or, you know, what happened?
It did, it didn't. It was kept alive as this discourse of loss of honor, as part of the sacrifice we had made for our national liberation. But it did not result in individualizing the women, in coming up with their stories, in hearing women's voices. And though a lot of the people who worked in the rehabilitation centers were women, and were women who were part of different women's groups, that feminist solidarity was not extended. It was more a thing of rehabilitation, charity, whether private or government, you know, or state-sponsored. So I don't know that, you know, and that's a kind of self-evaluation criticism, that the feminist movement extended its hands. But I think it was, again, in the 90s, that there was a search, especially with Farida Akhtar and Rubini. They started this search for Mahila Mukti Jodhas. And when the Nari Mukti Jodhas, Taramon Bibi, etc., started coming into the picture, the role of women in 71 started being discussed. And I think it's from within this that women as warriors, women as victims, women as sufferers, all these various roles of women in conflict started to emerge. And I think even we keep on saying that even if it's late, we as Nayanika Mookherjee entered that discourse.
I think, you know, you brought up some really interesting points that I want to kind of build on later, but now I want to bring Nayanika in, that your engagement in this issue, how did that come about? Through a sort of purely research lens, looking at sexuality in war, or was there a personal reason why you started to get engaged?
Can I speak without a mic? Is that audible?
No, I don't know.
I'll use the mic.
I can speak too loud otherwise.
Hello? Yeah. I didn't, for me, thinking about, so I was born after 71. So when you were saying you were in different lives, I was born after 71. Sorry? No, just the year after. Much after. I was trying to keep it vague. In 72, December 72 I was born. But for me it was 1992 as an undergraduate student in Calcutta when the Babri Masjid happened, and it was a kind of moment of hearing about the rumors of rape across communities. That was a kind of trigger point at a personal level, hearing about that. Second was, and linked to the feminist sensibilities around why men are killed, women are raped, that kind of question. So it was kind of from that feminist questioning. Second, it was in the early 90s, was also the period when Rwanda, Bosnia, Japan, 1995, rape as war crime, there was an international story was coming in. And third was the Bangladesh case, which I found at that point when we were hearing about wartime rape as being completely consigned to silence. Here I hear about Bangladesh, which where that the government had publicly referred to the women as Birangonas or war heroines. Now that is, it might seem, I mean, when I'm hearing both of it might seem quite a matter of fact, but if you think about it, what I argue is actually that is an unprecedented position taken by any government till date about wartime sexual violence. No government till date has referred to women raped during war conflict as war heroines, has given them that state recognition. I know that the manifestations of that is multiple and varied, and positive, negative, mixed, ambiguous, contradictory, all of it. But at a level of the state intervention, and for it to come out like a week after coming out in Purvodesh and various other newspapers on 23rd December 1971, is an unprecedented position. So for me, that fact, that was completely an important point to say, wow, what? But I think here it's all silence. So for me, and then I came to Bangladesh for the first time. I had no family connections, and yes, I hear about the silence in terms of there were no testimonies of women. But when I came here, the next day I remember going to the Jadughar. I see this image up there. I opened the next newspaper, there are these women's pictures and testimonies of it. And to someone who in the early 90s and you're reading stuff of feminist theories about wartime rape, and then everything is consigned to silence, this is completely mind-blowing to know that women are coming forward and talking about, and this is 1997 March, coming and talking about what happened to them. So I actually I kind of picked up, I felt there was no silence about it. There's nothing being wrapped up about it. There's nothing at that national level. And that's why I can't talk about the public memories and then go on to show how there is an existing public memory, which in the book I kind of talk around survivors of wartime rape, as well as kind of 40-year exploration of the visual and literary presentation, where it has continued, the figure of the rape woman has continued through the 70s, 80s, 90s, and then after that also it's been a constant figure of presence. Yes, what has been addressed is after what happened to the women after the war. Those testimonial accounts start coming out from 1992 onwards. And with Farid Akhtar's Mukti Jodha, as well as the Gono Adalat picture of the women on stage, Nilima Ibrahim's 94, and then the Aino Shalish project, and there are various reasons why also that happens, national and international, why that suddenly emerges and it's linked up with various international as well as national, and there are various kind of, there's a documentary called Eclipse, where the women are actually pointing out and saying all these things that are being done are precisely some of the people. They make a connection about 71 and what's happening there, whether rightly or wrongly. So people are suddenly going back to 1971 from the events of 1990s. So for me, for my point, as a result, I kind of argue against the idea of silence, which has been the predominant narrative about the Bangladesh war, precisely for these kind of very radical, very innovative way in which the government took a position. And I explore the various kind of contradictions that came with it. But at the same time, I really feel that, and Bangladesh should kind of promote that idea that there has not been, that the government said this, because often people assume, and particularly in the 70s, if you notice how feminists are writing about it. I mean, German Greer had this whole article in the Sunday Times saying that, oh, because it's a Muslim country and they are expected to keep their women in subservience, so they must have capitulated to the perpetrators. So this is the kind of language, and with various, and I talk about it in the book, how wartime rape is being orientalized. So there's various ways in which that people are surprised that the government actually referred to women as warriors. And I think this should be really repeated, even if you disagree with the manifestations of it, or whether, and there's criticism. There's a social worker, Nayanika Khan, who really criticizes this term that maybe women should have been referred to as Mahila Muktijodha. But there's various kinds of manifestations.
So yeah, I think these the labels and the sort of that kind of links to the good woman, bad woman, what we're seeing now in the world today, labeling women for certain things and linking it to how we deal with sexuality and conflict and violence during the war. So Firdous, I think just want to pick up this idea of the brave woman. Is a raped woman a brave woman? How, I know that we have two lines of thought. Some of the Birangonas want to be claimed as Muktijodhas, and some of them want to reclaim Birangona in a positive way. Perhaps you could...
At Naripoko, when we started the R71 project, or the Forgotten Women of 1971, we had a series of conversations with people, and talking to women who are known to be Birangonas, their main thing was they don't want to be known as Birangonas. It has become a pejorative label. They want to be called Mahila Muktijodhas. We met male Muktijodhas, real freedom fighters, who said no, that term only belongs to people who took up arms and fought. That's what a Jodha is, that's what a warrior is. And you will just dilute the term, and the term has been diluted because we have cultural workers who are Muktijodhas. We have all kinds of people who have identified themselves as Muktijodhas. So given that the term Muktijodha has become so liquid, I think including Birangonas would not be such a blasphemous thing to do to Muktijodhas. But at Naripok, we felt we wanted to hold on to the term Birangona because, as Nayanika was saying, it is a moment in which, even at the state level, we were willing to acknowledge women who had been raped. Now, women who have been raped in our country, to give them honor, to give them status, is something that term had meant to do. That term had the ability, had the potential to do. That it got lost in the intervening years is because we did not hold on to that potential. Somehow the existing notions of women's chastity, of women's virtue, or women's honor, so-called, started to surface. And that raped woman then became the fallen woman. And in many communities, and Nayanika's book talks a lot about it, it's sometimes the family didn't have problems, is not the right word, right phrase, accepted, acknowledged, kept the woman. The community at large didn't. Sometimes it's the community that did, but did not want the rapes to be talked about. So it was unveiling the discourse of rape, or the fact of rape, that became a problem. But on the other hand, again, when you think of these women's lives after 71, do you want that rape to define their lives? Or do the women want that incident to be the main marker that identifies them? Or do we talk about women's struggles as a whole? So I think we started coming into a discourse that is the difficulty when we talk about rape, about sexual violence, about women's sexuality, about virtue, about chastity, and all those things that construct a woman's sexuality. And I think as somebody who writes about women's rights as well, and I think that the figure of the Birangona really becomes that figure that is that anomalous, ambiguous figure who treads both terrains. And I'm thinking of representations. Nayanika also talks about representations a lot, but again, subjectively reading. There are two representations that seriously, I think, hold up the figure of the Birangona to me. One is a piece of fiction called Talash by Shireen Huq, which is The Search, which also shows the unending search, not only for the woman's or for the heroine's place in society, but becomes a parable nearly of our nation, our struggle for independence and our struggle for nationhood. In the same way, I'm perhaps exaggerating, but giving in to gore, in the same way that Khore Baire becomes a parable of the nation in the making, this becomes a parable for the nation that we achieved through this 1971 War of Independence. The other is a more documentary but a wonderful film called Shadinata, which in English becomes A Certain Liberation by Yasmin Kabir, where I think the figure of the woman who dominates the screen also shows you a certain liberation, that it is perhaps a liberation that can be had through transgressing all social boundaries, all sexual boundaries, but in that transgression, you bring the nation together. There's a wonderful scene where the Muslim family in which Guru Dashi is residing say, we don't eat beef because she lives with us. We don't have beef anymore. So all these sectarian problems that our nation is faced with, somehow this female figure bridges them all, but she herself is this transgressive figure. And I think that there are ways in which the figure of the Birangona is made to come alive in our national imaginaries, in our feminist imaginaries, in a way that we can start talking about it in more nuanced and in many more dimensions than just, is her voice being heard? Are we just objectifying her? Are we just thinking of loss of honor? Are we honoring her? There are just many more dimensions that can be brought to mind.
Before I go to Shireen, I think, Nayanika, I would like to have your, take on, a lot of it came out in your book, but anthropologically how you're looking at, the way it's emerged in the culture, popular culture here.
I mean, yeah, that's a good question, because in a way I was thinking of responding or engaging with what Firdous is saying. At one level, I talk about some of the stories that your mother told you about them hearing the whales next door, right? So often I would be told by people about the idea of Birangona linked to some of these auditory first encounters, auditory or visual encounter. And often these auditory and visual, so there are two sets of dominant images within which the figure of the Birangona has existed in Bangladesh. The two examples you gave are post-2000, and I've made that I show that how post-2000 various kind of representational changes and very interesting changes are happening in Bangladesh about this. But before that, two anecdotes or two accounts are important to narrate. So one is these kind of encounters that you talked about, which often then links up and cross-cuts with the famous Naib Bhai image, the Naibuddin Bhai, the Birangona image itself, of the hair photograph. And if I may, I just have the image just for people who don't know it. I'll just talk from here. This is the Birangona announcement that comes through in 1971. And then there are these, why I call it public memory, there are these genre of images, the face genre, what I call the body genre. And this is the image I was talking about, which people often refer to as Oichulet Chobi, that hair photograph. So often this would link up with what one thought of that the Birangona had become, maybe abnormal, or with the hair, with the bleak eyes, the muted sobs. That became a way of figuring who the Birangona is. And at the same time, there were similar images of women coming out who were being rehabilitated. So this is coming out in September 1972, as well as the figure of the Birangona in film clips, and a review of a film, which actually the review is talking about how it is problematic to bring the Birangona image in a film on Muokhtijuttu. So while showing the figure of the Birangona, who is signified by this wearing of the shirt and the lungi, who has been protected obviously and given these clothes by a man, the review is kind of showing that maybe not to bring this account in Muokhtijuttu films itself. Then there are these various images that come out of advertisements. There is even an advertisement of a biscuit. So have this thing called the bangs to biscuit. There's an Ogroni Bank ad of the violated Shamoli and muted sobs want to say no more genocide. And these are some of the rickshaw images again coming out in the 1970s. And so at one level, at that kind of the cross-section of the visuality and the encounter stories work very well to have an idea of who this abnormal Birangona is. And the second set of anecdote is that how, when I would sometimes come back from working with, among many of the Birangonas, many friends in Dhaka would be very surprised to hear that the women are with the same husbands with whom they were married when they were raped. So it's that loss of chastity and sexuality idea has been quite strong in thinking. So when I talk about the wound, the Birangona is often understood as someone who has this physical wound, which has muted her, or a social wound, which means she is outside any circle of kinship or any circle of nurture that people have ostracized or people have not accepted her at all. And so this is the dominant narrative I kept on hearing, and which I feel as a result has made the Birangona to be only understood only in a horrific image. If she is horrific, if her life story is visibly horrific, then she is an authentic Birangona. And I feel that kind of has taken away our sense of understanding how many women have actually lived with this violent encounter in all kinds of ways where the violence is kind of folded into her everydayness. I want to give an example and precisely pick up on what either of you were saying, is the experience of rape, the identity within which she wants to identify herself. And many women don't. So I give this example of this woman whom I call Shireen. She's a government official, and I chanced upon her while looking for this document, which she had actually, and I actually introduced that government document in the book. But while she sent it off for photocopying, and we were sitting in the office, and she really scolds me. She said, "Why do you want to get this document?" I said, if you had, this is incredible. This is the first time I've come across this document, and I would like to know the experiences of these women. And she said, "You think you will get the experiences of these women, and that too in a government document?" Anyway, and I'm being scolded literally here. And then she says, during the war, I was pregnant. And she starts narrating herself as to how she and her husband were childhood sweethearts. And during the war, her husband comes to visit her. And soon there's a big banging and knock on the door. The big banging, many people would recognize with that banging being a sign of the war itself. And they realize that he has been followed, and so he asks her to flee. So she goes away, and but witnesses her husband getting killed. And then she's playing with this paperweight on the table. And then she says, after the war, I had to marry this cousin of mine, whom I really did not like. But what happened to me during the war? And then she said, and they caught me. And then she says, and after the war, this cousin of mine, I would have never married him. But what happened to me during the war? I had to marry him. And the thing is, I actually still, my love is primarily for that childhood sweetheart, that first husband. And her second husband knows the fact that he doesn't have a hold on her emotions. And he would constantly tell her, you pray too much. And she says, and he knows it, when I'm doing my namaz kalam, I'm thinking of him, thinking of my first husband, but I cannot talk about him. So for Shireen, in a lot of ways, not being able to talk about the first husband, and she showed how his photograph is locked away in her office cupboard. She says, this is where my first husband's photograph stays, not in the house. So for Shireen, it is the effect of what happened to her during the war. But it's also, it comes out for her, it's folded into her everyday life. It's precisely the fact that her first husband cannot be evoked at all.
So I just want to sort of, I think we have to go to questions soon, but I think just really importantly, carrying on from that, this balance between finally women being able to tell their stories, not being silenced, and yet not making it about that being defining their life. I mean, where do we go from here? Maybe you could sort of build on something about the importance of testimonies, but also the importance of how to start to build a very much more nuanced narrative so that we can deal with it going forward. I think we can maybe have that and then go to questions.
I think the narrative is a complex one. And so I personally, just as you said, there was no silence, there was also lots of silence. Many women were taken back in their family, their husbands took them back, but many did not. Many women actually wanted to go back with the Pakistan army. So it is a very complex terrain,
Yeah.
and I think we will not have clear a clear picture that this is what happened and this is how people reacted and this is how families dealt with it. It's when we were working with sex workers in Tanbadar, there were women who ended up in Tanbadar because
I have a story of
okay. So there are many trajectories that happened, and I think when I talk about the fact that there was silence, even though people, political public leaders, politicians, etc., when they exhort on 1971, they always use this phrase. But this is not giving voice to the women. So the rape is not invisible, but the raped one became invisible and inaudible as well. So I think, of course, some people did. Nilima Ibrahim gave voice to a number of the rape survivors. And now, after 2000, and even more recently, we've seen actually plays in Dhaka stage bringing up this issue by different groups, by different theatre groups. So this has become much more now an acceptable element in theatre, in the cultural world. And some of it is also about challenging public values that surround it, the public values that tend to silence the women or to tend to condemn the women. And so that condemnation is actually there. Yeah, despite the fact that on 22nd December, we declared these women to be Birangonas, and which made people like me very proud at that time. So in the work we've been doing more recently, a lot of the women are actually living with their families. And I've asked, why did they not start living with their families in '72? They were in the rehabilitation homes and a bit later. For a lot of women, they were not accepted initially. And it was only afterwards that they went back. And then for a lot of women, it was not, they were accepted, but not Shadurina, not welcomed, not welcomed. Yes, and for example, now that many of the women are in their 60s, or late 50s, or late 60s, they are much more, I think it's also a function of time that we are talking about it now, because these women are also more willing to talk about it, and they're willing to come before television cameras and speak about it. And in one case, I know, Rajapala was staying with me, and there was a television interview of her, and with within an hour, we had phone calls from her son-in-law, from her daughter, and from her nephew, not even son. Why did you go on television? 44 years later. So I don't think we can under.
No. I'm actually not negating that aspect at all. But that has been the dominant account in which we have known. And I'm trying to say there should be all the varieties of
Yes,
stories
absolutely
brought out. Otherwise, we only know the Birangona as someone who is this horrific, has this horrific life.
But I think there are perhaps two accounts coming out, because it has been maybe in the public perception, but I think their stories, for somebody who, you know, who has been trying to find out more about them in the last few years, there was always this Mabunerijat and the image, but they're coming to me as much more real people now.
Yes.
Yes, than in the past.
All of them.
But also, I think the way they're coming into the public limelight is also, you know, as your book has it, the reactions after the Gonavadalon and their public hearing there. But also now with the government gazetting them as Mohila Mukti Jodha, Nari Mukti Jodha, and with compensation, there are also other stories of how unknown family members are now emerging from the woodwork because they're now there's going to be a lot of money, or a lot of money, but some money is being accorded to them. Something. So, you know, I think women's positioning in the family, in the nation, I think these life stories can be followed through as a mirror image exactly of how women are positioned. I think they're a wonderful angle to look at it.
No, I just wanted to say, I was trying to remember the women I went and spoke to in 1977, and the women we speak to now. You know, it has made a difference. I was speaking to another 17-year-old, another 18-year-old, and all she had was, you know, she was silent most of the time. She was not able to speak. So, but I don't know whether I could be able to find the same women, but the women we are talking to now in their 60s are, you know, able
But they
to
have a
speak
long
publicly.
life story to
Yes,
report
yes,
as
that's
well.
right.
They have 40 years of life story to tell us as well.
And some of these life stories are about going to the local hut and being thrown stones at. So, you know, that...
And not being buried by their families.
And not being buried by the families.
Nayanika wanted to
Yeah.
quickly, before we go to the floor,
I mean, one of the things about
how much time do we have left?
One level,
Okay.
one level they are coming out because of that age, and the other side also is like what happened with some of the women. Is the reasoning among people in that area would be, how should I don't know, because they didn't know on their own this could have happened to us, this happened to them by force. But why talk about it now when you cannot bring the perpetrator? So the reasoning is, you will not get justice. You have in-laws and family members. Why put yourself in that way? So there's that reasoning brought in. But also the quota, I have argued, is brought in various kinds of existing unequal relationships. So this con, stigma, honor issue is a political economic term. It's completely evoked within political economic context, and us as researchers need to address that without thinking, Birangona, only stigmatized. I think that will not get us anywhere. But often people are evoking stigma within existing unequal relationships, which ensures the other one is kept down. Like between co-wife politics. First wife always bringing it up towards the second wife. So I think we need to also explore these kind of scorns coming towards women within the political economic context.
I just want to mention one other element, which is the only case in which, you know, having talked to many women, only case in which a husband actually said, but I failed.
Yeah. I've had quite a lot of them.
So I think that is something that hasn't been coming out enough. Even in the plays I've got to see about it, or in other depictions, it hasn't come out enough of what happened to them.
Yeah, one very small funny story. Funny story. Sorry. Yeah, I will. And just one last funny story about the husbands. So there's a story among these women. One of the husbands, one of the women was an orphan, and she got married off to the man who the aunt and uncle could find. But she didn't want to get married to him because his first wife had already run away with the rich chairman from the next village. So we were sitting and laughing about it because they saying, oh, you know, Appa, we need to get a proper marriage for him. You see, he always has bad luck with marriage. We need to make an application to the Prime Minister for his marriage, not our rehabilitation. Because his first wife ran away with the rich chairman's wife. His second wife, me, got raped. He needs to have a proper marriage. So there's all this dark humor also among women talking about the losses and reminding him that he failed.
Can we go to some questions now? Anybody has any? Right at the back. Yeah. Yes? Take the mic there. Right at the back, that young.
My question was that what about the children of rape? Were they just as ostracized as their mothers were? Or I'm talking about the ones that survived.
Yeah, let's. So okay, that's one question. Yeah.
Could you please elaborate a little on the orientalization of wartime rape that you were talking about?
Okay. Any other questions? Naila.
Yeah, this is a question I asked Nayanika when I was listening to her in London, but I now want to ask you guys, because a lot of Nayanika's book is about the politicization of the whole question of rape, particularly by Awami League and the way this football has gone on. There's far less about BNP, Jamaat, etc. And I wondered, as the question of Birangonas has come to the public forefront, what has been the attitudes, the discourse of what I was calling the illiberal right? Because we know that the left have, it's become a cause, but what has happened elsewhere?
Some other questions? Yes.
I had.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay.
Just collecting.
Actually, I just had a comment and it sort of follows.
No comments. Can we just have questions?
Okay, I can phrase it as a question if you want. Following Naila's thing, my question is, would we be willing to look at the politics of policy making towards women, particularly post-Awami League? Because in my own research, I have seen how the Bangladesh Women's Federation, Relief and Welfare Federation, how their documents were all burnt, or when the new regime came, the whole thing was looked upon as a disgrace, and many of these documents apparently were missing. So whenever there's a regime change, are we willing to look at the regime politics and what role it has played in the Birangona analysis?
Anyone else?
Yes.
Yes, Sarah.
I think I've almost forgotten my question, but anyway, just as you were talking about the age of the person who is a Birangona, that how it changed when she was 18-year-old, how would she talk about it, how would she express herself? Don't you think, and when she's 60, she's open to talk about anything, and she's going through a life process. I think it's also a matter of the age in which we lived. I think the 70s, in Bangladesh, we didn't have the likes of Shireen Huq, and they were not grown up enough. And we didn't have that movement, and we have to give it. Just as we have to give them their due, we also have to give the government, who actually could envision the shame that came on the women. So my question is that, don't you think it's also a matter of the age in which we lived that changed the idea of Birangona?
Okay, I think you're going to have to address these. So if you've noted the other points. Shireen, can you just start and then...
Your question was about the children born out of the war rapes. Actually, there's someone sitting right here who is an expert on that. Ruby Ghaznavi has actually worked with with the children who were born out of rape. But all I want to comment is that, you know, just as women, the whole issue of consent, I think most women did not have, most women who were subjected to that massive covert of rape, abortion operation, including they brought in specialists from Australia to do late abortions. I don't think they were given a choice. And you know, at the same time that I felt proud on December 23rd when I heard about the announcement about Birangona, I heard many years later that the Bosnian government actually said every child born to a Bosnian woman is a Bosnian. We did not say that. So that thing became kind of hollow for me afterwards. The Birangona bollam, but then I didn't put in enough content to it, didn't take up enough concrete actions to make that actually an honor. And so a lot of children, as we know, were adopted by people in Europe and elsewhere. And then, of course, not everybody was adopted, so there were children here. And I think those children also suffered. Recently, all this is happening. Recently, there was a television program which interviewed a young man who was born to, no, it wasn't a television program, it was Farzana Bobby's film. Yes, which everybody should see. Shabnam Firdausi, sorry. But Farzana Bobby's film also everybody should see. Shabnam Firdausi's film. So these are two very important films, I think, which have been made, which actually try to give it the more nuanced, the more complex narrative that, you know, of what happened in 71 and what people who were affected in 71 have had to live with for the last 45 years.
Firdous, you want to answer any of the questions?
I was trying to answer Sarah's question about the age in which we lived and now. I don't know that the 70s, perhaps it was too close to the war, too many things were happening, and I wish that the women who were working in the rehabilitation centers, who were working with the women, had a larger sphere in which they could talk about their experiences and their problems and their moments of hope as they were working together. Those voices didn't come through at that point. They're beginning to come through now, but many of those people are no longer with us, so we have missed a great opportunity. And you know, as researchers, we are keeping on missing these opportunities, and I think those stories are worth excavating and knowing about. And regarding why now in the 90s, I think, as Nayanika has pointed out, that the 90s, with the Beijing World Conference and everything, there was a huge, and the Vienna Conference, there was a huge international effort in which the Bangladesh women's movement was very participant, active, and that filtered onto us. But I'm quoting Shireen now, when you're coming to our age and us, it's now that we are, you know, at an age where sexuality is a vague memory, we can talk about sexuality ourselves and bring it. When we were 18 and 19, it was very tough. But now we have to live our lives, we can talk about it. Open forums, and we can say all these things.
Okay, moving swiftly on to the last bit of politics and policy, the politics of sexuality of war.
I've actually had a very long interaction with Naila on that, so I won't talk about that now, but I want to talk about abortion and the children question. Recently, after the book was reviewed on the radio on BBC, I got this massive handwritten letter in Durham, a 4 or 5 page letter, basically writing about a couple who had adopted 2 kids from Bangladesh, literally at my workplace doorstep. and there've been quite a few other kids within UK, and I'm actually working right now on some of these adult children. I've worked on, and they are in the same age in terms of these early 40s. So what is interesting about, yes, the government actually wanted the women, but not the children. In terms of who came through the official process, many children were folded into what are practical kinships within families. So you don't talk about it. But the government would not, it's very apparent in the newspapers at that time. And many of the social workers would say, this is really powerful, they would say, we tried to discourage the women to stay away from the emotions of motherhood, so that they could let go of the children. That we asked them to stay away, I mean, remember the painfulness of it in a way, for the social workers as well as in the way for the women. They can let go of your child. Some of them did not like the children, some of them knew that they had to give them up. So the issue about children is an ongoing one, and many of them, as you might know, are visiting Bangladesh, are very much engaged, or actually don't want to know what's happening about Bangladesh. And there's a whole lot of idea of coming back, but also shaming about the way, it's a very complex process of what it means for different kind of adoptees. Orientalizing rape, I was primarily talking about the way Islam, gender, patriarchy, shame, honor, is kind of collapsed together to make a vacuous understanding of wartime rape, and in the case of Bangladesh. The 20 years, the age issue, I think today the Gazette has happened because of the last 20 years of movement, from the 90s till now. Without that, today there would be no Gazette, because this demand towards the government has been happening from the late 1990s. And only after now, in last year, the Gazette comes into place. And whether it's good or bad or various kind of manifestations are happening, that's a different story altogether. And the regime politics, I actually refer to how the newspapers reflect the changes or don't talk about certain things. It's like history books. So that comes through in many of that itself.
So, I mean, the politics of it.
One of the things that happened to women who became pregnant because of the rapes, they were often referred to as "tade peter moddhe shotru ache." So there was no choice. And even though some women said, "But this is my child," so I think we have to.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of accounts of the pain of women having to have the silence, that they could never acknowledge the baby that they'd given up. They could never talk about it for years and years and years.
And certainly most of them did not have the choice of keeping them, which many women wanted. Yeah.
I'm taking your link.
You said you discussed with Naida about the other, like the PhD of Jamal point of view. Did you talk to any of them? So we know that what was their defense or attitude towards it?
I mean, I was looking at newspapers. I was doing work at the time of Awami League was when I did the research itself, and to go and talk to them, it was quite self-evident in the newspapers itself what had to be said. They would primarily talk about the military. If any time any kind of opposition party leader was talking about the rapes, it was about the militaristic valor rather than anything else. And I was in a tricky position in terms of my positionality working on this issue as an Indian in Bangladesh. And there were tricky times, and I did not want to kind of flag up my position per se. So I talk about it in the beginning of the book in terms of how it is not about, it's an account of certain time. But then a certain time, I also then go on to look at what is happening thereafter beyond 2000 itself. So it's not to kind of only, so it's looking at how testimonies are being undertaken at that time and suggesting ways of how better we need to do the testimonial process.
I think we've run out of time now. We could just continue talking about this because it's something, I think, it's a huge issue that we need to come to terms with. And I'm really, I think the big thing is that we've actually started, I think, to have some real conversations about it. So thank you so much for coming, and you know, let us hope we can explore more and really go forward.
List of but women are not included there. Upazila based because every Mukti Yoddha, when they die, they have to be buried with state honors. You know, this is, and the highest official of the area, deputy commissioner or they have to.
I mean, I think what you know, that's the Mukti Yoddha list, and then I think they've actually identified less than 170 Birangonas actually officially on the list anyway so far. So, you know, with estimates of 200,000 and 170, but it's a good start, and let the conversation continue. Thank you very much.